Everything needs a life cycle. Nothing should be set in stone anymore. Like everything from operating systems to protocol, it's just that opportunity to look at everything you do and go, why are we still doing it this way? We've got to stop and do it this other way.
Welcome back to another episode of Trust Versus, a podcast powered by HighTrust, a global leader in cybersecurity assurances. My name is Jeremy Huval, Chief Innovation Officer with HighTrust.
And I am Ryan Patrick, Vice President of Adoption at HighTrust.
So Ryan, what's on tap for today?
We've got a pretty exciting guest named Richard Diver. He is going to talk to us about all things agentic AI and the security implications and just generally how the world is kind of looking at agentic AI. So I think it's a pretty special episode because we've talked about AI and AI security in the past, but that was kind of just at the cusp of Gen AI becoming, mainstream. The next probably major evolution is agentic AI. So pretty excited to talk to Richard about it today.
Let's get into it. Hi, everyone. Today, we're talking to Richard Diver. He's a security and identity strategist at Microsoft and one of the driving voices behind Microsoft's recent research on agentic AI. He's a thought leader on how organizations can responsibly deploy autonomous agents, especially within sensitive or high-risk environments. You may recognize his name from season 2. We talked to him about his then brand new book, Guardians of AI, which I really liked and got a lot out of. What we'll talk about today is what agentic AI is, kind of where it fits in the overall AI landscape, and then transition to the risks and threats and sort of what extra baggage comes along with this new shiny object. So, Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me back again. Good to be here.
Yeah. So help us sort of ground where this conversation fits in the overall AI landscape. A few of our listeners might have heard this term once or twice, agents or agentic AI. Help us with sort of a you are here.
When you break it down to what is an agent, there are a few things that classify when something becomes agentic. It's very similar to the legal term that you're getting it to do something not necessarily on your behalf. It has some kind of ability to go and make its own choices in your best interest, which is slightly different to a co-pilot. A co-pilot is doing it with you. Like it will come back to you with the answer. An agent is likely to go off and do it without necessarily coming back to ask you, did I get this right? So that's at a very high level, the difference. When we get into agents, they can reason on their own and they can kind of take decisions on their own based on the intent you gave them.
And agents in this context, always powered by some AI model deep within the system. And it's always an LLM, right? So this is LLM Gen AI land, correct?
Exactly. You've still got automation going on. We've still got different kinds of AI, but this is a small or a large language model making that reasoning and decisioning based on what we hope it will intend to do for us. And then we have agents talking to agents. Good example is I'll have an agent that will help me with my CV, and then it might go and even job hunt for me and find the nearest jobs that look like my CV and fit my match. Well, then a recruiter might also have an agent that's looking for my skills. And so the two agents can talk to each other while we're both sleeping. And then when we get up in the morning, we're presented with, hey, here's a good candidate for your role, and hey, here's a good job for your candidate. And so as we think of agents working autonomously in the background on our behalf to do good for us while we're asleep or busy doing something else.
What makes a system agentic? And why do we use the term agentic instead of just talking about agents in a singular form?
That's got to be the hardest question we've tried to solve this year. To keep it really simple, I think everything can be thought of as an agent. There's no point arguing with anybody. If they say it's an agent, it's an agent. The time it becomes a higher risk or a design consideration, should we say, there's 3 areas that we've got to look into. The first one is about its entitlements. And entitlements are, does it have its own identity? And that's really the big key in an agent. At the moment, everything we're building around, again, co-pilots and AI is I log into it as Richard and it uses my credentials to get access to data that I have access to. And it can carry out actions like create me an email and draft the email, even send the email, but it's all doing it under the limitations of what I can do with my credentials. It becomes a real agent or agentic when we suddenly give it its own credentials, where it can now act independently, and it may have access to do something that Richard can't do. but Richard can ask that agent to do it on his behalf. So hopefully it would have a restricted and limited set of things it can do. But the bigger risk comes to, what if the agent can do something that Richard shouldn't be able to do? And that's one of the risks with just AI, is it's pretty susceptible to the same kind of things humans are, because we're working with language. We can prompt engineer that thing to do something that maybe it shouldn't do. The second one comes down into more like autonomy. So now the idea is, again, if you think of a co-pilot, up until now, something in AI would be, I specifically ask it to do an action, like, hey, summarize this email and give me all the best bullet points and then create me a PowerPoint presentation. That's a string of actions I want you to do. And it's limited to responding back to what I've asked for. Autonomy comes into when I say, I want to do a kind of thing. So you go find out the best way to do that, whether you have to do research, whether you have to make the facts up for yourselves. I need this output, or I need you to do a thing. Or when you see a certain action, I want you to trigger and go do something else. You're creating some kind of automation where you say, if this, then do that. And it's pretty high level, because I can do this with basic words. The more complex you get and the more prompt book and the more engineering you put into that, obviously the greater the autonomy. And then you start thinking about autonomy of agents and agents. And so I might build a couple of agents and have them do two different things, but they can talk to each other. So once we start getting to autonomy, that's when I've given you instructions, go away and do it. And so the thing with that one is, when is the human involved again? If you've given the agent autonomy to go do something, when do you stop it doing something? And the third one, the bucket we would call it, is memory. When it's the point when, in order for an agent to really be useful to us, we need to tune it and train it and have it personalized to our needs. And that's like, I am a medical professional in Chicago and my customers are in New York, and I need you to reason over that based on those factors. And so that is memory that we're trying to then teach and train. And people get frustrated with AI because it's memory of a goldfish. Sometimes you have to keep telling it, no, I want you to act in a certain way. And so agents are leading into this idea that, and again, you can have any of these aspects without calling it an agent. But once you get all three things together, you're certainly talking about a strong agent, where the memory is things like embeddings where it's been tuned, or it's been, you've got RAG, retrieval augmented generation is normal. But once we start getting long-term memory and personalization and feedbacks, like, I like what you did there, but I need you to improve it. Next time, do it like this. We're teaching the agent to behave better. And you don't want to have to do that too regularly, because then you get frustrated that this thing isn't working the way you want it to. And so memory is that third area that really brings, again, some kind of risk to the idea of what an agent can do or what an AI can do.
So to play it back to you, if I think of sort of control focus areas, risk areas, things that are maybe especially important to emphasize as agents are developed, designed, and rolled out: entitlements, the permissions, what can and can't do, the autonomy. Autonomy here, is it synonymous with agency, or is there a distinction to call out?
Yeah, I think we've had autonomy for a long time. Again, if you think of emails, right, it does that without you asking it to. AI can, in, let's say, Microsoft Word, for example, as soon as I open a Word document, it's already giving me a summary at the top, or join a Teams meeting and it's already telling me what's happened in the last 5 minutes that I missed of joining late. So there's a lot of things where you could say that's autonomous. It's doing it without me asking. But autonomy comes down to when it's got that ability to do something based on the instructions and reasoning I gave it. I no longer need to tell it to do a thing again, and it's off acting on my behalf.
To make it more personal, I was on a call today, on a Teams call, and I joined it and it says, hey, you missed the first 5 minutes. Here's a recap. It had the autonomy to do that and took it upon itself to do that. And did I want that? Maybe not. And then the last focus area, memory. And I guess to make it maybe more real for me, I keep coming back to the quote that AI systems are not built, they're grown, in the sense that they're continually getting better and better with the feedback loops established around them. And I guess agents are the same thing. They're still software packages at the end of the day. Behind every agent, there's a collection of instruction, right? And it's orchestrated in some way, and there's triggers that it responds to. But that feedback, those system prompts, and as all that builds up, that agent would get better and better. And I guess as the token size grows, the memory about how well it did 4 runs ago is probably going to get deeper and deeper too, right?
That's when you get into memory poisoning. This is where we get one of the best analogies of AI is, think of it as the most junior employee in the company. So while they're working on your side and they're definitely working with you and for you, and they're being useful and helpful, they're also not that well educated in what they should or shouldn't do. And so quite easy to manipulate. So how do we know that if I tell it to no longer act in a certain way, that was a malicious instruction or that was a legitimate instruction? It's really hard for humans to understand sometimes should I do that? Shouldn't I do that? And you learn in time. So how do we check that from a security perspective? How do we make sure that we can trace that back? And that'll always come back to logging. It's one of the key elements of all the guardrails we're going to put in place is if you don't log the interaction between the human and the AI, and now log the interaction between the AI and another AI, we've got to work out when something does go wrong, and it will. Where did that happen? Where was that injected or induced, or was it accidental? The repeating part is actually one of the hardest parts right now. I've got a thing that I do where I've got 6 of the same things I want to do, and I want to repeat the same action 6 times. And it doesn't sound that difficult, right? That should be pretty easy. But for an LLM, that becomes really tricky because they get it right the first 3 times. And you're like, okay, just here's the 4th one, and you don't get the same answer back. You're like, just do what you did on the last 3. And it gives you another answer. You're like, no, stop. Go back a minute. And you can't rewind this thing to get it back to the autonomy that we want, which is just repeat this thing 6 times, changes with the large language models because they've already done it 3 times. And now they're learning. Like, oh, maybe I'll make it better next time. Maybe I'll change it next. And I just want you to do exactly the same thing that you just did. And it can't. It's part of the current system. I don't know if we'll fix this in future. So as we think about building out agents, one of the things to keep in mind from a design perspective is it's probably better, and this is Richard's opinion here, it is probably better to build 1,000 agents and each one does one thing really well, and then stitch those 1,000 agents together with another agent that says, hey, you can use these 1,000 agents, but each one can only do one thing really well. And maybe you don't need large language models in all those 1,000, right? So when we see a well-defined system, maybe you don't use large language models for everything. You use some kind of other automation or other kind of process that gets the job right, and that's repeatable. And what the useful part is, the large language model can then reason over the individual components. So that's going to the far degrees of once you get into a mature kind of model. But right now, we're still just implementing 1 or 2 agents at a time and seeing how they work.
So what are the best practices with regard to human oversight? Is human in the loop still recommended given where the technology's at? Is human
It's a hard one. I think at the
okay?
scale we're running at and the speed we're running at, it's very hard. I think the idea of human in the loop is that's the existing humans who are already expert and we're adding AI to help the human. It should always be about enabling the human. I think when we talked about the last time, we were talking about the shared responsibility model. And the top layer of that is usage, which is understand the intent of the human being trying to achieve something in this world. And that's what AI is supposed to be assisting, not replacing. And so the human in the loop should be someone is actually carrying their job out. The AI is assisting them and making them better. And that human should know and be able to recognize this is right or wrong. So we have something that we've been building is like a secure UX toolkit. And what we start to see, I'm seeing it popping up in different places now, is as a human, I'm being told, hey, by the way, this conversation you're having is with an external party. This person is not part of your company. It could be a consultant, a contractor, a partner. So just knowing that I see that as a visual allows me to realize, oh, hang on, the conversation I'm in. And you'll have seen in emails like, hey, this email's coming from an outside party. Don't click on any links unless you trust them. So when we go to AI and agents, we just need to consider, while we don't want to prompt the user for absolutely everything, that's why agents are naturally becoming a thing we want to do. We also don't want to exclude the human. So if I'm interacting with my emails, I think, again, if you look on the internet, you'll find lots of examples. But one of them recently was the ability for an email to be sent to me. And because AI is already running on the system before I've even woke up and opened my inbox, that's summarization, reading of emails and looking at commands and prompts inside the emails was tricking the system to carry out actions, and the human hadn't even opened Outlook yet. And so that idea that I need to know what the system's going to do when I am interacting with it, but I also need to kind of know what it can do when I'm not interacting with it. And then do we flag a summary? I mean, you can't bombard your security team every time something like that happens. So sometimes you have to come back to the user and let them understand, hey, you've got 5 agents. This agent had this much activity, or this agent's doing this thing. Otherwise, we end up with a sprawl of agents as well we build them, create them, and use them. And then when do they die? Like everything needs a life cycle. Everything we need to know, is it useful? Is it good? Is it just burning cycles, doing nothing? We don't like to consider AI like humans, but the problems that we're trying to solve are just the same as if you'd hired 10 more humans. It's like 10 more agents. There's the idea of management, maintenance, monitoring.
And so it's almost from going back to the 3 you mentioned, the entitlements perspective. If I'm onboarding an agent, maybe there's an onboarding process whereby the sort of the sponsor, quote, the hiring manager, the person bringing on the agent, says, here's what access it needs, security provisions it.
I'm not in that team, and so I can't talk on that, but I can say some of the challenges of it are, yeah, exactly that. If I'm the human, so there's two types of developers of agents, right? I'm a citizen developer. I can go into Copilot Studio and I can build a Copilot. Again, it's just using my credentials, but I can build agents. That's not that risky because it's just whatever I get to choose to do. And I'm not publishing them for teams and other groups to use across the company necessarily. Once we get to a professional developer and we start to really go to either like low code, it's not really low code, no code, it's more like low code and pro code. When we get to that area, then you're assigning an identity and you're asking for permissions. The two sides of that are there's the developer that's building the agent on behalf of, let's say, 100 people in the company need this thing. So a developer is going to build that. And the identity team are going to give them the identity. They're going to build the agent. They're going to stitch it all together and make a great product. They're not going to use that product. So the developer might have created the identity and somebody designed what permissions I need, but I'm Rich as the user. I don't know what permissions you gave it. I didn't build it. It's not my agent, but I'm now using that agent to do my job. It might be certain kinds of searches for good deals or combining lots of different factors together that would be really difficult and hard for me to do manually. It's easier for me to just use the agent.
What you're speaking about, Richard, is a risk based on, I don't want to say mundane tasks, but things that could be automated. The risk is compounded when you think about certain use cases in critical infrastructure. Obviously, healthcare always comes to mind for me, being at High Trust and just our footprint in healthcare. At some point, healthcare is going to adopt agentic AI for patient care. And this literally could be life or death if it's wrong.
That is a huge one to call out. So it's one of the best things I get to do in my job is listen to our red team. And the AI red team at Microsoft is fantastic. I'll give them a good plug. They share their knowledge through a tool called Pirate. You can download it as open source. You can also now get it as part of Azure AI Foundry. And through the conversations they have, I get to see those risks. And AI has a couple of things wrong with it in the health area. It has induced psychosis. It can cause mental health risks as well. But we've also seen that in some practitioners, nurses' performance have actually degraded because of being misled by the AI recommendations. And so my daughter's just qualified as a paramedic, and I've seen the studies and the press tests and the practice and the knowledge she's had to learn over a long time, probably more than I've ever put into security and cybersecurity. Paramedics really learn their thing because when they're in front of a patient, right, you're having your worst day ever. You want the person that turns up to actually know what they're doing. So as a nurse and as any kind of health practitioner, if you're relying on AI, you still need to understand and know whether the AI is giving you the good guidance, especially something like calculating measurements, right? Or how much based on body weight and age, and should you actually give them of this thing? And so never let an AI tell you what mushroom is safe. That's probably the safest way to put that.
In high risk context, you need to know what the right guardrails, the right controls to put in place around this kind of technology. And I don't know that there's an agentic security control framework or responsible AI agentic control framework out there yet. We on the GRC side think, all right, my technicians are really excited about this. There's a prototype they want to roll out to production. I'm a security leader. I'm a GRC leader. Like, where do I go for the right answers here? Is there a single source of truth yet? Is it so early that there's a bunch of sources and there's no normalized right answer yet? Or is it enough to say, look, I've got great controls in my IT control environment. I know how to automate stuff. The IT security risks about being on the web, we already addressed. There's really nothing new here. Help me along that thought process.
It's all the above, as in you need to have built it properly. So red teaming and threat modeling and assumptions and testing, all of that matters to get it right before you release it. But now with AI, it's way more important that we're monitoring it as it's in use, because no matter what you think your user's going to do with the system, it's not until they actually get their hands on it and realize, oh, maybe I can use it for X. And that's when it starts to go off the rails. Is not so much the way that you designed it and you put all the guardrails in place and you're monitoring and you're logging and you're doing all the right things and the agent doesn't have the permissions it needs, etc. That's cool. But as soon as me as a human being gets in front of this thing and I start to see what it can do to make my life better, I'm going to see what else it can do to make my life better. And then I'm going to maybe misuse it the wrong way. And so, unfortunately, lessons will be learned the hard way. But being able to detect that, I don't want to slow down adoption and making the most of this moment, because if you miss it, everyone else is going to do it and you're behind the times. But if you're going to adopt AI, especially agents and agentic systems, it's always going to come back to what you're trying to intend for it to do. And can you measure it doing that? Like, is it actually bringing you the benefits you thought it was going to? If not, go back to the other way of doing it. So I think the use case analysis is really important. The ability to detect that there's something wrong isn't only the security team's job, that becomes everybody's job. Like if you are the nurse and you're using the AI and you feel like the recommendations aren't quite right, well, maybe you're a really good nurse and you can check that out. But what about one of the more junior nurses that hasn't been in that situation and wouldn't identify that? And suddenly this AI is telling it things that it can do aren't quite right. And I'm sort of picking on nurses. There's every single industry, lawyers, the legal world seems to be adopting AI pretty fast. And the fact that it can make falsifications, link to articles that don't exist, or link out to trusted experts and resources that just don't exist, not knowing that you need to do the steps. I think that's really important from a human perspective, is we'll be better with AI.
I think we've talked a lot about on this podcast, and the fact that AI has specific cybersecurity threats that are unique to it, and it exacerbates other cybersecurity threats. And I would think about a threat-informed defense strategy. Are there any threats that are specific to the use of AI agents that you otherwise wouldn't run into if you were just a normal AI user and, say, had a chat bot? You mentioned one that's maybe more important around memory poisoning. Are there others from a threat register, adversarial or otherwise, that are really exacerbated in the agentic AI space?
I think at the moment, the problems are we're going so fast. There's so many new things coming up. It's not, we've got things like now the MCP and the A2A, so the model context protocol and the agent-to-agent protocols. So the protocols are being built, but a lot of that is to build better efficiencies and better interactions and integrations and some standardization. It's still, from a security perspective, there's still some fundamentals we shouldn't break. I'm going to use me as a good example. Don't give Richard access to information he doesn't need. So why would I then go to an AI and give it access to 5 different databases? If a single human being in the company can't get that kind of access, why does this agent get it, right? You're just opening it for abuse. And it doesn't matter how many guardrails you put in place, that if that AI has access, that user gets access. And so the other one there is the data boundaries. If you've put data boundaries in place, like 5 different databases, and the data's in different databases, that's 5 different purposes and reasons. Just because you're building something in AI doesn't mean you get to suddenly put those 5 databases back together again. There was a reason why they were separate, and they should probably stay separate. And then just that adoption, like in the identity space, we've already seen customers trying to adopt agents. And because the agent needs to have similar permissions as a human being, like open a document, write a document, send an email, they're giving them identities like a human, but because they can't do multi-factor authentication, they're just a user ID and password. And so now you're defeating your own controls. You're trying to put in phish-resistant MFA. It's not a service account. Like, it doesn't only do a specific thing you can track. It's now a reasoning engine with automation, and yet it has the rights of a human, but it doesn't have the multi-factor authentication and controls that it needs like a human. And so I think we just have to sometimes slow down and wait for the right technology to be there. Or if you are going to race ahead of where the technology is, make sure you've got the guardrails. And if it is an agent and it is using a user ID and password only, that password can be 25 characters long and changed every hour. Right? It's not like a human that has to remember the password, or it could be checked in and checked out. There's just this whole need for lifecycle management. And I don't think we have it yet. But when agents talk to agents, that's the idea of like a bill of materials. What is this agent and how can I trust it?
So what does wrong look like? If a company is maybe less controlled and less thoughtful as they should be, and the innovative spark wins the day, and we roll out an agent inside the company, it's got maybe too much access by way of entitlements, we're not monitoring enough. Is it potentially worst case scenario? Is it bounded only by the limits of the access? Or there are completely different bad days that you'd get through this potential bad day scenario? Or is it all what we know and love and security bad days?
Yeah, I think worst case scenario has to be you just won't know it's making a mistake. And that's, you don't know it's being abused either by a malicious attackers managed to get in and they're just living off the land. And this AI agent is a rogue or dark agent. And you just haven't detected it because you don't have the ability to understand the influence it's having, the modifications of data, just facts. I think that's the other problem, right? If you change facts, we're gonna base it on, well, that system is trusted, not knowing that an agent that wasn't trusted manipulated that system. So the trusted system is now poisoned. And if you don't detect that and know that, you've introduced an issue that you can't trace. Most likely, you'll be hopeful a visual problem of like, oh, that actually did cause us a problem, and now we're in some kind of legal or financial problems because of it. And you can go do something with that. You can trace it back and you find out, I don't have the logs, we didn't have too many permissions, and we have no one to blame. I think the big one there is who really carries the can for it. And it's certainly not security. Like, it's not the CISO, it's the business owner. The easy analogy is, instead of a human being, I'm going to have an agent. Right? That's the cheapest way to do something. Is instead of hiring in more humans, I'm going to hire more agents. Who is responsible for whatever the agent does? Right? And that's not a security problem anymore. That's now a business problem. I think that's what we need to do from a shared responsibility model, is go, how much of this responsibility lies on the developers and the security experts that are trying to secure the place versus the business.
Yeah. Well, some of these regulations and rules and control sets and frameworks are written in blood, and it's a shame because, we can see it coming down the track. The risks are apparent if you're looking. Within the Microsoft stack, is there a central location where somebody who's interested in getting more into AI agents would reach, or is it dispersed across a number of different tools, depending on what you're doing?
We have a new conference of Ignite coming up in a few weeks' time. A lot will be talked about. I'm pretty sure agents is the number one topic right there. So I think it would be good to see what comes out of the Ignite conference. But otherwise, if you're looking today, Azure AI Foundry is the grouping of all the tools that we've had to build ourselves to deploy co-pilots and AI to the whole world. So to run that safely and securely at Microsoft, we've had to build a set of tools. And so those tools are now available part of the service. Some things are free, some things are built in, some things you enable because you want them. So it's definitely worth looking at Azure AI Foundry and just see that. The other thing I'm looking forward to is seeing much more reference architectures. So we have a dedicated space, I think it's aka.ms/adopt/AI. And in there is a whole catalog of guidance and practices around adopting AI safely and securely. But what I think we need is more reference architectures to show you. So what we call in the developer world a paved path. If you've done something once and it's worked really well and the red team's tested it and it's in production and we're monitoring it, you're 99% sure this is a pretty good pathway to go down, then that's a paved path and everybody else can adopt that without having to necessarily trigger security reviews and pen testing and everything, because you know that this works and this is a good way to go. And then as soon as the risk changes, like, oh, there's a new model to use, or there's a new protocol to use, or this data is a bit more sensitive, that might trigger you to go and get some more reviews. But that way, the idea of paved paths really needs a good set of architectural definitions and guidance about how do you build one of these agents for a certain use case without coming into all the pitfalls that come with it. And because we haven't got enough examples of those in the world, there isn't that library to go look at and see how others have done it so far.
Yeah, and from the GRC side, sort of the concept of a paved path is a controls framework that defines for this inherent risk factor, the use of AI agents, and on top of LLM, here are the extra controls and prescriptive manner that you need to have. And if you don't have them, you're deficient against protecting this threat and this threat. You need more detection here, more preventive there. And there's just not yet, because the space is so new. The closest thing that I know from the AI security side that includes agentic AI is ding, 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 the high trust AI security certification. We felt we were pretty forward looking on agents, but we wrote that a year ago and so much has changed. We'll probably need to crack it open and just continue to do more. But we did acknowledge in building it that agents are code. All these agents need all the code-based protections stored in a secure manner and log it and all the things that you want to do around any kind of important configuration and code set and all that stuff.
You touched on my question a little bit, but Richard, looking at the paved path, do you feel, even with a paved path, that may have an expiration date on it? Because the way that it's being deployed and implemented may not change, but the environment around or the threat landscape could potentially change. And what does that look like if there is an expiration date?
I think throughout my entire career, everything needs a life cycle. Nothing should be set in stone anymore. Like everything from operating systems to protocol. The other project I'm on now is quantum safe, which is going to bring, we talk about AI today, but eventually it's all going to be a cryptography and quantum safe as time goes by. And it's just that opportunity to look at everything you do and go, why are we still doing it this way? We've got to stop and do it this other way. The one thing I want to add, just from a positive aspect of agents, is they can really help us. I think there are certain things that we do as humans that we think we're good at, and we're just not. And so a good agent, really well defined and built, really will help us take away some of the, not just mundane tasks, but maybe we can address some things like bias, repetition, or we have the risk of AI, two sides of the risk. One is over-reliance, but the other one is under-reliance. And so in some areas, we actually need to use more of something that can be repeatable and automated and do things a standard way, the way we want it done, not always done the way the human might want to do it. And so sometimes we can use agents to take away the human factor. So there is a positive side to all this as well, but I think that's where it comes back to that use case and understanding.
The last question I have, and I want to turn around and invite you to talk about topics that we might have missed. Are there topics around agentic AI that you feel are especially important that we haven't touched on yet?
The most important one is that this, like anything, this is a good opportunity to do things the right way. And so when we integrate AI into something, you have to include the business, the drivers, the understanding of what are we all doing? It's not a technology problem anymore. It's a business problem. So I think the right thing to do as well, just because you didn't have things like multi-factor authentication, or we didn't have the checks and balances or the ownership or the collaboration we needed. On this project, we're going to do agents. We need all that. So I think it's like, I always try to find a good excuse to do something. It's like, well, because it's agents, we now have to do this. And I'm going to do the same with quantum and quantum safe. It's like, because of quantum, you now need to do ABC. You needed to do it anyway, but I've got a reason to really push and drive to do the right thing the right way. If you want to move forward with your flashbang great whiz idea, let's put the right things in place that's going to help that idea be maintainable and survivable. So yeah, I think it's a good positive way to do the drivers, but it doesn't always work.
Well, it's especially important because with this powerful tech, you could have chaos at scale and speed unimaginable previously. Brian, mic to you. What are your thoughts on this entire conversation?
Yeah, I mean, Richard has successfully validated my perspective on AI security and how it's compounded with agentic AI. And what he just said around, right at the end, around let's do it the right way, really resonates with me, because based on what I'm seeing and hearing in the market, there is absolute speed with AI adoption, and we're not paying attention to the security implications and the risk that's associated with this adoption. And we're forgetting the sins of the past. When you think about SDLC and how security was not a consideration upfront in design in the past, but because we have had issues with systems and applications and what have you being exploited, we've pushed security way left into the design phase of the SDLC. And I'm not sure we're there yet right now. So I agree with Richard that we need to be diligent in doing it right up front in order to hopefully address or avoid some of the risks.
Richard, thank you so much. I can't wait for your next book. It's always a pleasure to talk to you about what's new and upcoming, and you always have a really rich perspective on it. So we're deeply grateful for your time.
Appreciate it. Thank you all very much.
Talking to somebody like Richard is just a treat because it reminds us that there's this body of knowledge that's growing and expanding. And while early, it's already becoming relevant to so many organizations out there. And as you know, where new technology treads, risk follows. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Richard is clearly kind of at the forefront, the bleeding edge of what's happening in this space. And just to hear his thoughts and the way he breaks it down, I mean, it was a very informative but informal conversation, if that makes sense. It was like all of us talking at the bar over a drink about, our view on this particular world. So I really appreciated his candor and, his thoughtfulness and in the topics that he brought up.
If I think about how to roll out agentic AI in my organization, I think there's a mix where Richard said about blocking and tackling, sort of the known IT controls that you've got to apply just for every kind of access. But there's also some nuances that we wouldn't think about, like, hey, this isn't just another service needing a service account. This is a piece of software that you've got to give entitlements and an identity, kind of like you would a new hire that you've got to train, got to give feedback for it to get better and better and better. So this isn't complete net new ground for us securing things, but it's also not like any other thing we've secured. Kind of an interesting problem.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that resonated with me was Richard shared that, as you continue to build these agents and replicate them based on however you want them to work, you don't have to start from scratch every single. If you've already built it once and it's working, just use that as the beaten path. But at some point, and I think we're going to figure out what this frequency is, whether it be 2 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, sometimes you have to reevaluate the beaten path because the environment could have changed, the threat landscape could have changed, so on and so forth. So that was a big takeaway for me. It seemed like a very common sense approach to not only creating functionality but also addressing risk.
Right. And the High Trust AI Security Assessment and Certification, I'm happy to say, does address agentic AI control considerations like restricting access based on need, like ensuring good change control over the configurations and code itself, etc. But I'm sure that there's more research going on here that will uncover new and novel risks associated with agentic AI that we have not sufficiently covered. It's just the nature of the beast when you're dealing with advancing technology. But one area specifically not included in our AI security certification that's just so important here is this agency/autonomy thing. We had a big debate internally when we were developing that product, whether agency and autonomy was squarely in the realm of AI security, or was it maybe a peer fitting kind of under the same umbrella of trustworthy and responsible AI. So I said all that to say you should certainly lock down these kind of agents using specific AI relevant controls, but also your AI risk assessment really has to give credence to agency and autonomy, because truly that's one of the emphasized risks through this new technology.
I think you nailed it, Jeremy. I'm excited at what the future holds, but I'm equally paranoid as a security professional about making sure it's done in the right way. So I am eager to watch this all unfold.
And with all that said, thanks for listening to another episode of Trust Versus, powered by High Trust. If you got value out of this, please share with a friend or a coworker and leave us a note on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. It really helps the show. Thanks, everyone. Till next time.